Hello good people of YouTube and welcome to my hobby channel. In this video I continue with yet more kit bashing, converting and restoration of my old classic Citadel plastic skeletons, and I build some Wargames Foundry or Warmonger Miniatures skeleton knights which are made of metal and are the beginning of a Vampire Counts unit. For anyone who hasn't seen my previous video, which kind of interrupted the making of this one, I did an unboxing of Wargames Atlantic Skeleton Cavalry and Chariots. So please take a look at that for some scale comparisons and a look at some of the wonderful figures that you get in the Wargames Atlantic box. Hopefully you can see the contents of these blisters without too much glare from the lights. What I've got here are a selection of metal skeleton cavalry from Wargames Foundry. So these are skeletal or undead knights. They're probably available now from Warmonger, which is the division of Foundry that deals with their fantasy ranges. And I was given these a while ago when I was writing my modelling and painting fantasy figures. Wargames Foundry were very generous with the paints and the models that they gave me, and unfortunately not everything made it into the book. So what I'm going to do in this video is put together these wonderful figures and start to create a unit of cavalry for my Vampire Counts. And then when I've got these built and based up and ready to paint, I will then start green stuffing the old Citadel Undead horseman here, which should be very familiar to you if you've seen any of my previous videos. As I said in those videos, I want to add some saddle cloths and some rotting fabric and a little bit of horse furniture to these guys, so they're not just sitting on the back of a skeleton horse with nothing else going on. So I'm looking to detail these up a little and bring them into line with the style of these miniatures here. So what I'm going to do now is crack open a blister. And I'll start with the king here, and I'll get that figure cleaned up, assembled and glued onto a base. So here we've got the king out of the blister, two halves to the horse. There's a shield there with a skull nailed to the front of it. Looks like some kind of vulture or something perhaps. A slot in there for it to go over the arm somehow and potentially fit like that. For anyone who's not familiar with working with or cleaning up white metal, it can be a bit challenging. Historically, the older figures are easier to clean up and work with because they have a higher lead content. Some of the new miniatures don't have any lead in at all, and that makes them very brittle and difficult to work. The older they are and the more lead they've got in them, then the softer they are and the easier they are to work. But obviously everyone knows that lead is a heavy metal and presents health and contamination issues. You could wear gloves if you wanted to. I'm not wearing them, however. I will be stopping and washing my hands very regularly. I'm not sure what the lead content is on these, if anything. I'll find out in a second. But I'm just going to clean these miniatures up and get them assembled as quickly as possible, making sure that I keep my hands cleaned regularly in hot soapy water. And I'll build this one, and then I'll build the others off camera. And I won't bother filming all of that unless I come up against something that's unique or challenging and hasn't been demonstrated on this model here. So the first thing that you may notice is obviously metal doesn't always fit together as well as plastic or resin. And I will have to glue this model together, including the base there. So the horse needs left and right sides gluing together. I will try and clean this up as best I can. I don't think there's anything causing an issue there. So really it just needs super glue and some green stuff or Miliput to fill the gaps once it's glued. I've decided to salvage an old broken base that originally held a different figure. The puddle base on the bottom of this skeleton horse will actually cover that quite nicely, and it just saves me using a brand new base. So we just get some super glue on these surfaces here, and that bit of cloth there, and also in that part of the base there. And that should be enough to hold the figure. So I'm just going to stick that onto the plastic base now. Once that's dry, I can fill the gaps and texture the base where I need to. So I'll get some super glue around the sides of that there. And just try and position that as centrally as possible. Right, I'm going to let this horse dry now and assemble the other metal horses, which will follow the same principle. I have a slot base that comes in two sections, one sort of keying into the other, and a left side and a right side, obviously, that need joining and then filling. But I'm going to give the super glue on this ample opportunity to cure before I start tidying it up with putty. I've assembled all the horses, and whilst I was putting those together, I began to realise that ranking these models up might be a little bit of an issue. So at the moment, all the riders are just balanced precariously on those horses there, and you can see how tight that is. So I've had to position the horses, some slightly forward, some slightly back, in order to get that unit to rank up. Now I've included the plastic Tomb Kings on the ends there just as a scale reference. So what I'm going to have to do now, although I was thinking originally about painting the riders separate from the horses, what I'm going to have to do now is glue the riders to the horses so that I don't lose track of which rider fits on which horse in which position. I was thinking about drilling under the saddle and pinning, but I've decided not to bother. I'm just going to glue the riders straight to the back of the horse, and the large gap that you get between the legs and the horse's body, I'm just going to fill that with some Miliput when I also do the bases, texture the bases, just to add more stability and increase the surface area of the model that is in contact with the horse. So basically do some gap filling under there. I've decided to go with the command model because that is the center model in the front rank. I've also swapped one of the horses round because this looked quite cool and I didn't want that on a rank and file. So I am going to mix a tiny little bit of Miliput with green stuff. I've had to use blue tack on this just to keep it in place. But once I get the super glue out and combine that with a bit of Miliput, that will give me a good solid bond, and there are no long garments around the legs here, so I won't be gap filling between the feet and the horse, just around the saddle on this. So I've mixed up some Miliput and green stuff there, and I'm going to use that to fill under the saddle when I super glue, to build up around the base as well. and to cover any unsightly gaps that might remain after the rider is on the steed. Break a little bit off. And then just a thin bit of putty there. Come in and try and remember roughly the angle that I want this guy. As I said, slightly off center. So if I bring the king in, line up the bases there, you can see how close the foot is there to the back of the king's cloak or fabric. So that really is a tight squeeze. But what I do want to do is just scrape out the excess putty, and I can just put that on the base because that is putty mixed with super glue. So I need to just get in there, scrape that out or push it back. So there's a bit of gap filling to do on this, but the important thing is to give this putty and the super glue a few hours to dry. So I'm going to do that on every single model. Use a bit of super glue and a little roll or bead of putty. And then after the figure is in place, the rider is in place on the steed, I can then come in with a wet sculpting tool and just shape some putty around the puddle base there. And then I can either take a pin and texture it like the pattern on that metal, or I can just ignore the texture and work over it with Earth Effects diorama paint and basing materials. So there is the standard bearer, and although he's the largest model and the most awkward to film because of the height, I've done him first, so I can now work on either side with the king or the hero and the musician and make sure that I mount those miniatures so they rank up nicely. There, so that's my next job, is to carry on with these, which I'll do off camera. I'll come back when the riders are all mounted, the putty is dry, and I'll just do some gap filling on an example model. Okay, so now I'm going to do a little bit of gap filling, and I don't know how well you can see there on the camera, but if you look between the body of the horse and the rider's leg, you can see my finger through that gap. It's not a biggie, but when the models are ranked up and you can look down and see bits of bases or models from behind or to the side, it kind of ruins the effect for me personally. So I'm just going to take a little bit of putty to run inside there and close that gap. It's really fairly simple. I don't have to come all the way down to the foot. I'm just going to try and take that cloak up to the body of the horse, following the line of the saddle there, to create the effect that maybe the two were cast as one piece. That's one of the things that I've always found with plastic miniatures or multi-part metals, is that when they've got a gap, they don't fit the same aesthetic as a single piece casting resin or metal casting does. Turn it round and come in here and make sure that the putty blends in with the foot there. Right, so that's nice and clean at the front and fairly clean at the back as well. Now I do need to come around the edge of that saddle and get rid of that gap there, that undercut. I'm just going to push in a tiny bit of putty in there. Smoothing it as I go. So I'm going to try and do something similar on this side. And there we are. It just, as I said, gives me a little area where I can create some shadow and makes the figure look more solid and the rider and the horse look more like they belong together. But hopefully you can see the effect that I've gone for there. I still need to clean this one up. There's a little metal tag there that needs to come off. But I'll do that when the putty is dry. Now I'll probably run a little bit of putty in there as well, just to hide that gap. And now I'm just taking a silicone shaper just to push that putty into that gap, smooth out any excess, blending it into the metal. There, I hope you can see that. That looks better than the gap that was there before. And then the centre of the chest there, that rib cage will probably be in shadow. The handle keeps knocking the camera, but nevertheless I'm just going to fill that gap so that when you're looking at the models from the front, you don't see a gap there. Right, so there we are. That is actually that model finished, and I'm going to do the rest off camera. So whilst I wait for the metals to dry, I've mixed up some green stuff, and this is just green stuff. I've not blended it with anything because I need it stretchy and sticky and to behave more like chewing gum than clay when fashioning rotten fabric. And I'm not going to go overboard on these, but I just want to create the ragged remains of a bit of saddlecloth. So just push a little putty around there to scrape it off and just work it like so. Just put that around the front there. And you can use a silicone tool. This is a chisel tip, and I can just drag that and press it to create some texture. And the beauty about this, because they're undead and it's rotting fabric and so on, you don't have to worry about both sides being even or matching up. You can just create whatever looks right, feels right, whatever you fancy. Pushed in behind the knee, blended in with the fabric that's gone over the top. Flick round, and sometimes you just find a happy accident, something that looks good. So if I zoom in now, you can see how that tiny piece of green stuff there has just given a better look to how the skeleton is seated. If I compare that to one that doesn't have a saddlecloth, I think that just makes enough of a difference for the rider to look like it belongs on the horse. Another thing you can do is you can use a sharp edge, a blade or something, just to put stress marks into the fabric, old sword cuts, anything like that, and just create something. You can even go in and jab the odd little hole or pinprick. Just create something that looks worn and tired. And I'll probably do some straps across the back of the skeleton as well for that breastplate. Try that with a little bit of green stuff pushed up to the edge of the breastplate there. Right, did a lot of that off camera, but so you just work the strap like that. And then push that down, flatten it out slightly, take that in round under the arm there. And then just detail. Basically, a few leather straps there and a rotten saddle cloth. Again, if I bring the other one in, you can see the difference it's made. It's only subtle, but I think it looks good. So even though these are fantasy figures, adding a bit of realism just helps make the unit pop a little better when it's on the table. So I'm going to carry on off camera and do saddle cloths on all of the rest of these guys. Nothing too dramatic, just enough to make them look like they're sitting on something. I've been beavering away off camera, sculpting some very ragged, rough saddle cloth there, so I can paint those up to look rotten and grotty. And I've done, again, and quite a rough and ready straps behind the breastplates on those skeletons. To look like rotting leather. They can be painted up and textured to look very dirty and grubby. So that unit now has a little bit more horse furniture. I still want to do some reins on these, but I'll be doing those probably out of thick paper. But we'll see. What I have got here are two little bits of Miliput and Green Stuff, mostly Green Stuff with a tiny bit of Miliput mixed in, probably a 70-30 ratio of Green Stuff to Miliput. Just enough so that when this dries it'll be a bit more solid, and you can probably guess from the way I'm pinching this what I intend this to be. If I pull out my hero, I don't want a cloak. This is why I haven't done the straps on his back. I don't want a cloak that I fold and bend myself a lot, so it looks like a thick piece of paper or a flag. This is going to be the scaffolding, if you like, on which I will sculpt some fabric folds and creases and things. So, as I said, I'm not going to put all these folds and things in the fabric here. This is going to serve as the scaffold or the platform onto which I can sculpt a bit more detail when it's dry. And I'm just going to push it against the back legs of the horse and the tail. I can come in later and use some super glue if it hasn't stuck properly. But that is basically the beginnings of a cloak. So that's the other cloak that I'm going to do. And again, this is just the scaffold, just the kind of bare structure. I will come in with a silicone shaping tool when this is dry and add some ridges and some folds in the fabric. So there are two cloaks, which I will return to in a minute. So really the only thing left to do on these guys is the cloak. These guys are more or less ready for painting, and then the chariots in the back need a bit of work. Another thing that I will do just before we reach the end of the video is I will sculpt a few pouches and maybe some blanket rolls on a couple of these skeleton models just to finish up with. Okay, so I've just spent 10 minutes sculpting some pouches and bits and pieces, and the camera wasn't even running. Take a bead of green stuff mixed with Miliput, place it to the back of the rider and push and shape that bead into the shape of a pouch gathered at the top here. So you're pushing to create creases as well. There we go. Drop that in at the top. Push that so you're forming the tied end of the pouch that's kind of folded over. Cut into that bit there to create the opening of the bag or the pouch. Coming in with a clay shaper again, just to form that there, like so. What I want to do now is just finish off this video that I started. A while ago I actually broke away from this video to do an unboxing of the Wargames Atlantic Skeleton, Cavalry and Chariots box set, which I bought. That was the previous video that I've uploaded to this one, so you can see that in my channel if you wish. But it does mean I'm starting to lose my place in all of this. And I know the last thing that I wanted to do was just sculpt a cloak on my skeleton cavalry hero. Mostly Miliput this, little bit of green stuff, and I've gone heavy on the Miliput because you can smooth that down easily with a wet sculpting tool. And all I'm trying to do now is really just add a few sort of folds of fabric. But I'm just going to start working with a silicone clay shaper and just blending and smoothing it to try and create some interesting creases in the fabric. Add it there. Pull that up. Right, I think we'll have some more at the top here, which I will work round to here and then taper out. Just make sure that's loaded there with water. And again, any happy accidents like this here, I'm going to work with. I like the way that's just happened. And as I said, I haven't really got a plan. I'm just going with what feels right. And I'm just going to put a little bit on the bottom edge here. Smooth that down, blend it in. And there we are. And as I said, I'm not spending too long on it because it'll look all right once it's painted. But I do want to try and come in and deal with that gap between the cloak and the rider. By fattening up the underside of the cloak. Gently work it till I'm happy with how it looks on both sides. And it just means you don't get any light shining through. And you don't see any of the miniatures behind the model peering through the gap in the cloak, between the cloak and the rider. And also it adds a bit more strength and integrity to the finished conversion. Try and push a little in there as well to blend the cloak in with the tail. And what I want to do now is just use a sculpting tool to create some rips. And tears and cuts and things. Do a few bits with the scalpel blade as well, because they give a thinner mark. There we are. So there's the cloak on. So there's the cloak on my hero. I'll do the same thing for the chariot rider. Nothing is ever simple, and apart from the fact that it's baking hot in here and I'm struggling, yeah, the cloak fell off whilst I was trying to put the texture on, which isn't uncommon when you're converting, but obviously it's an issue for me because I'm trying to get a video done. So I've super glued it back on. I've reinforced the join with a bit more putty down the back of the skeleton body. I've textured that as best I can, but I do need to wait for it to dry now before I can finish off with some detailing, which is frustrating, but the show must go on. Just a quick and easy method for creating cloaks. So I'll tidy that one up before my next video when I prime and paint these. That about wraps it up for now, I think. I need to go and do something a little bit different. I do have some lizard men that I will be painting next, and after that I'll probably do a bit of Dead Man's Hand before I look at some more Warhammer the Old World and return to my Bretonnian and Empire projects. Once again, thanks for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please smash that like button. Please subscribe for more videos like this. And also, please don't forget to leave a comment, but keep it kind and respectful. Most importantly, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next one.